G'day legends, in this video we're going to take a look at a couple of ways we can use reverb and delay to add depth, warmth, character, interest and dimension to our vocals. But enough buzzwords, let's dive in to how we can apply this to our mixes. So for our first example, we're going to take a look at a track that I mixed recently for an artist named VIVOZ. And I have a link to the song in the description below, so make sure you go and check it out because it's a really cool song. But we have a bit of a 70s slap reverb kind of thing going on, as well as just a bit of tape slap delay at the same time. So I'll show you why I'm using kind of two slap kind of effects to create the overall vibe that I'm chasing here.
I used to be a man in a desperate need, looking for something, it was always here.
So really cool track, great vocals, really nice instrumentation. So I've got two sends off the vocal and one of them's going to Abbey Road's Chambers, which is a Waves plugin. When you initially load this up, this is pretty much kind of the sound you get. It's a nice slappy chamber kind of reverb sound. It's got a bit of a natural pre-delay to it already.
I used to be a man in a desperate need, looking for something, it was always here.
So you get the initial vocal and then the reverb kind of slaps after it, which is a really cool sound. I love that. And we've done a little bit of a roll off up to 300 Hertz on the bass cut, just to make sure it doesn't get too muddy or woolly with the reverb. And that's about all I really changed in this. And then the other thing that we're adding to this vocal is Sound Toys with the 15 IPS tape echo preset. Such a great setting for adding width and thickness to your vocal, because when you open the tweak setting down here, you can see you've got this width knob, creates a little bit of that harsh effect, sort of splits the vocal left and right and just makes things sound a little bit wider. Now we don't have any extra feedback, it's just like a single delay. So have a listen to what this sounds like.
To be a man in a desperate need, looking for something, it was always.
So you can hear how it creates a nice bit of width and fullness to the vocal, especially when you don't have it super loud in the mix. It ends up just making the vocal sound a bit thicker and warmer.
I used to be a man in a desperate need, looking for something, it was always here. I used to be a shadow in a cloudy day, waiting for summer, but it never came.
So it's definitely adding a really nice vibe to the track, chasing that kind of 70s slappy kind of sound, and that's what we're getting at the moment. So that sounds really cool. Okay, if we check out this next section, the vocals have a bit of a lo-fi filter on them, kind of rolling off the highs and the lows, getting a little bit more of that radio-ish effect. And then we're creating a bit more of a dreamy soundscape here with the reverb, as opposed to that slap vibe that we had going.
It was all I could do. 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 We getting older.
And then back into the chorus with that tighter sound. So to create this effect, we're using a bit of a different reverb. We're using Valhalla Vintage Verb. We have it on the Bright Hall with about a 5.3 second decay. And I'm rolling off up to around 610 Hertz to get rid of that low mid mud that could kind of build up and sort of ruin the mix. We've got it on the 1970s mode, which is a nice dark lush kind of modulating reverb, which is really cool. And then you can see with the automation, I'm feeding it in on the ends of the lines just to create a little bit of an extra reverb tail through the gaps here. And at the exact same time as while we're doing this, we also have some throw delay as well, so a quarter note delay, and we're doing this with Echo Boy as well. So a quarter note here, rolling off a little bit of the lows and a little bit of the highs, pushing some saturation in, a little bit of feedback to help the note carry through to the next line, and that's about it. So have a listen to how these two things are working together.
It was all I could do. It was all I could do.
And just by using the automation to bring it in and out, creates a really nice sense of movement as well. So we have that nice soundscape, but then it kind of ebbs and flows with the vocal, which I think sounds really awesome. And another trick you can do with that is you could feed our delay back into the reverb as well. and have a listen to what it does to the sound of the delay now that that's being fed back into the verb. It gets really epic.
It was all I could do. It was all I could do.
Just makes that effect sound massive. So an extra little tip there for you. So two really different vibes there. We've gone from that 70s slap reverb kind of sound over to a really lush, epic soundscape, and then back again. And so just by using a little bit of automation, we're able to do that by dialing in some different effects for a different section and then pulling it back away and going back to what we had before. And that's a really cool way of just making different sections in your mix stand out by giving them a slightly different vibe, a different reverb. Don't feel like you always have to stick to one reverb for a whole song. You can always do stuff like this where you bring different effects in and out. Be creative. Okay, so for this next example, I'm going to take you into one of my songs, and this track's called Headlights, and I'm using reverb in a pretty dramatic way on the backing vocals just to create a real sense of space and this kind of dreamy vibe. The whole song's like a nostalgic kind of vibe, and this reverb kind of captures that feel for me. So by doing this, I can keep the lead vocal a little bit drier and more intimate, but then I can have these big reverby moments as the backing vocals come in and out.
Laying on the hood, headlights at our feet, watching the world go by beneath the glow of the street lights.
So you can hear when that line kicks in, you get that nice dreamy effect, and that's literally just Valhalla vintage verb, 51.5%, concert hall, 4 seconds. It's almost like the startup setting, just rolled off up to 730 hertz on the low cut, so we're not getting a really muddy sound, but just having it on the backing vocal on that particular line just has a really nice effect. And that's just a cool way of using reverb in your mix to add a bigger dimension, and it's not going to smother your lead vocal if you have it on highlighting lines with the backing vocal.
Beneath the glow of the street lights,
have a listen to what it sounds like if it was drier.
Beneath the glow of the street lights,
like just doesn't have the same effect and that same kind of dreamy sound that we're chasing. So don't be afraid to be adventurous with reverb. Like, you can use excessive amounts of it in the right places. For example, like this, I think it works really well.
roll the windows down, we're flying through the night. With the wind in your hair as you smile at me from the passenger seat.
So just a cool way of applying a big ambient kind of reverb, just using it on highlighting lines with your reverb. Obviously it's a higher vocal, so that works pretty well. If it was a lower vocal, maybe be a little bit mushy and muddy sounding, so you do have to apply it in the right places. So in this next example, we're going to take a look at some more sort of like standard delay and reverb that I might apply to a vocal that maybe doesn't need a whole bunch of spatial effects. It's just there to kind of add a little bit of extra depth and color to the vocal without sort of standing out too much in the mix.
I can see that you're wasted in that dead-end job, too good for work in a 9-to-5 club. A ribbon road is calling us out of here. So lock the front door and turn that closed sign around. I'm waiting up front with all the windows down. The engine's warm in the night, there's freedom in the air.
So it's a bit more subtle in this example, but it really does make a little bit of a difference. And in the big scheme of things, those little differences really make the big difference in the end. So let me show you just basically what we have going on here. So I've got two sends coming off the vocal bus, and one of those is going to a reverb. We just have our LX480 Essentials from Relab, and I'm using the Joe Carroll vocal plate. So that's the settings that it starts up on. And I've shortened the plate, and I've taken a little bit more low end out of the reverb. And that's about it. There's no pre-delay or anything on this.
I can see that you're wasted in that dead-end job, too good for work in a 9-to-5 club. A ribbon road is calling us out of here.
So it's a nice sounding plate, but just having a tiny bit of that in there.
I can see that you're wasted in that dead-end job.
It's subtle, but it gives us a sense of space, whereas if we just have the dry vocal.
I can see that you're wasted in that dead-end job, Too good for working a 9 to 5 clock.
It's a good sounding vocal, but it lacks a little bit of depth. And then I also have Echo Boy on here, just doing a quarter note delay, rolling off a bit of the low end and a bit of the highs, pushing a bit of saturation into it. And then again, just a tiny bit of this in there.
I can see that you're wasted in that dead end job. Too good for working a 9 to 5 clock. A ribbon road is calling us out of here.
And so we can hear it clearly because we're listening to it in solo at the moment. But when the mix is playing, you can't really hear those echoes that well, but they are creating just a nice sense of space.
I can see that you're wasted in that dead end job. Too good for working a 9 to 5 clock. A ribbon road is calling us out of here.
And to me, that sounds really nice, especially on lines where the vocal pushes a little bit harder. The effects come through that little bit more, really encouraging that sense of space.
I'm waiting up front with all the windows down.
So particularly on that line.
I'm waiting up front with all the windows down.
Just has that really sweet sound about it with that little bit of underlying effect there. So that's kind of a way that I would typically use reverb and delay when I don't want a lot of it in a mix. I'll just have an underlying effect like that, and you can play with the length of your reverb and the type of delay. You might have an eighth note for a little bit more of a shorter, slappier delay sound, but even when you just have it tucked back, it ends up just warming up the vocal. And if we take a look at the chorus, you can see there's a little bit of automation going on here in the background. And so we have some gaps in the vocals here, so perfect places to add some throw delay.
Feel like we can leave, we can drive forever. I get a feeling that whenever we're together, we're alive. We don't need it.
So it's just a nice way of filling out some space, adding a little bit of interest, just doing some automation throws on your delay. Quarter note delay usually works pretty well, but depending on the rhythm of your song and what you're trying to achieve, you could definitely play with the note value. And you can see even on my delay, I've pushed the mids up quite a bit, and then I've just pulled the volume down. So it's just a big 10 dB boost at around 1K. We're just kind of rolling off the highs and the lows. By taking out that low end, we're avoiding mudding up the mix. And by taking out the top end, it sort of deals with like the S's and the T's, and it makes the delay not stand out as much. And it just puts it in that nice sort of mid-range where it's sort of a bit more radio sounding.
If you like, we can leave, we can drive forever. I get a feeling that whenever we're together, we're alive.
So pretty cool, just like a quick echo. There's not a lot of feedback on it. It doesn't sort of drag on forever. It just fills out that gap. So have a look at one more example. And for this one, it's a big wall of sound pop punk rock track. I've used it in a couple of other videos before. And the way I've applied reverb to the vocals in this one is a little different to the other tracks. And I'll show you that in a second. But have a quick listen to the chorus. And what we're doing here is I'm using Verb Suite Classic, and I have it on the CLA plate, and we have a long pre-delay of around 150 milliseconds. And it's just a really cool effect of just delaying when the reverb actually hits. So we're going to get the clean, dry effect of the vocal initially, and then the reverb comes afterwards. And in a dense mix, this helps the vocal to cut through, and then you still have your sense of space that follows after it.
Sick feeling, hypnotize you, pierce my soul with those captivating eyes. I'm too down to see that.
So you can hear how the words hit and then the reverb comes afterwards. So that's what's helping the vocal be nice and clear and punchy. And as always, it's about dialing in the right amount of reverb. So it's really easy to push it too far, especially when you've been mixing for a while. You can kind of just creep that reverb up.
Sick feeling, you pierce my soul.
And think, wow, that sounds really nice, and you put it in the mix. And
sick feeling, hypnotize you, pierce my soul with those captivating eyes. I'm too down to see.
And while that does sound kind of cool, later on you come back and you listen to it and you go, wow, there's like so much reverb. It's usually hard to get it right because the right amount of reverb is usually a lot less than what we actually think it is initially. So always be wary. If you're unsure, just come back to your mix later and listen again and see how you feel about the reverb then. Now, one other thing that's kind of cool, and I've mentioned this in videos before, but before the reverb, I also have a de-esser in this setting because the plate reverb on Verb Suite Classics is kind of bright and it lets the T's and S's through in a kind of a hissy, kind of annoying way. So having a bit of a de-esser before the reverb gets rid of all of that stuff, really cleans up all that sibilance, and it doesn't come through in an annoying way. And then I also have a bit of EQ after the reverb, just pulling down a low shelf around minus 12 dB at 107 Hertz, just getting rid of any kind of low end murky stuff. And then a little cut around 458 Hertz, just cleaning up the mids a little bit. Kind of want the reverb to be brightish and not taking up too much space in the mix, really. And it's worth noting that this is basically like a lexicon style mod as well, and we're using the A plate. And so that's kind of like a nice sort of balanced cunning sounding reverb. It's not a really thick sound, it's not a really bright sound, it's just kind of a fairly balanced, nice, clean sounding reverb. So if you're thinking about like styles of reverb and how to apply them in a mix, if you're wanting something that's kind of like large and warm sounding, you'd probably go for a hall. If you're wanting something that's fairly balanced and clean, you'd probably go for a plate. And then if you want something kind of more interesting and vintage sounding, you might try like a spring. And then you can use ambience reverbs to thicken your vocals as well. So applying a short reverb to just add a nice fullness to the vocal sound without actually adding heaps of decay to it, which is a similar thing to what we do when we use like the slap delay, using a short delay sound to thicken the vocal. You can do the same with ambient style reverbs. There's an endless amount of options and creativity with reverb, so the sky's the limit, really. Now let's have a look at one more thing in this song. It is the choir section. So I'm calling it a choir. I guess it's kind of like a group vocal kind of thing. But let's have a listen to what it sounds like with all of the effects that I've used to create this nice big sense of space. And then I'm going to turn them all off so you can hear what it sounds like without it. So let's have a quick look at these effects on our group vocal channel here. So this is what it sounds like without anything on. On our bus, we're doing some processing here. So we have VMR again, and we're boosting some presence with the custom series lift. And then we're also doing a little bit of a roll off to around 134 Hertz. And then a cut around 1 dB at 600 Hertz. So just kind of shaping it a little bit with this. Brightening it up, and then we're following that up with our reverb. So this is where we're getting our nice sense of space for our group vocal here. Again, we're just using the A plate. The pre-delay is at about 80 milliseconds, tiny touch of chorus and a little bit of width on this as well. And then I have the mix knob at around 30%, and I put a little bit out on the low shelf. And then we have another EQ after this, just to clean up kind of the low end, especially once it's in the mix. This just cleans up nicely so it's not muddying the mix up. In the context of the mix, having it a little bit thinner works a bit better. And then we're following that up with micro shift, little secret weapon here. And basically got this at about 40%, got the focus around 146 Hertz, style 1, bit of detune in there, and a lot of delay, so sort of like splitting the left and the right signal, making it a little bit wider sounding. Just makes it sound a little bit wider, a bit fuller sounding. So it's pretty intense. It's a big wall of sound at this moment in the song. You can hear how it's just making it sit in the mix a little bit nicer and just filling out the space without getting too invasive. So here's another way that I like to use delay on vocals. If I want to create a bigger sense of space, sort of fill out the stereo field a little bit more, make the vocals feel a little bit wider as well. We're going to use a dual delay here, and on one side it's going to have an eighth note, on the other side a quarter note, and then you can just play with the roll off, just depending what you want to get out of this. I've taken a fair bit of low end out and left the high end pretty untouched and just pushed a little bit of saturation into it, and I'm on the studio tape mode in Echo Boy. You got a little bit of feedback, but not heaps. And this is obviously synced to the tempo.
That this will never be more than a game you play to fuck with me.
So obviously when it's loud, it's kind of messy and sort of taking up a lot of space. But if you have this kind of tucked subtly back in the mix, it really does create a nice sense of space in the stereo field.
Sick feeling, hypnotize you, pierce my soul with those captivating eyes. I'm too dumb to see that this will never be more than a game you play to fuck with me.
And that's a pretty common setting that I like to use on vocals when I'm trying to create a nice sense of space with a little bit of delay. Just remember, if you want something to sit further back in the mix and not grab as much attention, you might take some of the high end out. And when you want to bring things more forward in the mix, having it a little bit brighter is obviously going to grab your ear's attention quicker. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check out the link to my website in the description below. Go get yourself some drum samples or grab a mixing course. All that stuff is a massive support and definitely helps with all the time that goes into making these kinds of videos. Even if you just want to say thanks and show a little bit of support, there will be a PayPal link below to where you can donate to the channel as well. And if you are looking for some new drum samples, then check out this next video coming up where I'm going to take you through my Trigger 2 sample pack.
I used to be a man in a desperate